3 Lives, 3 Worlds, Lotus Steps. Wherever step goes, lotus blooms. Metamorphosis. Lotus Step Chapter 15, Book 1. Dragonfly felt that Qingyu had become a little different since they returned from visiting the doctor in Jeshuanjiwen. She talks less, smiles less, and is a little lazy all day long. The weather was not good last month. There were heavy winds and rains on 7 or 8 out of 10 days. The wind and rain also made her a little lazy, but not the lazy way she is now. At that time, she would either keep herself company or let actors keep her company. Reading, playing chess, and listening to songs were common ways for young ladies to spend their time. Nowadays, she likes to be alone, finding a place to relax with her eyes closed, her legs bent, her cheeks propped up, her eyes slightly closed. Once she is raised, she can stay there for half a day without moving. Dragonfly reported these to Ji Mingfeng one by one. Prince Ji was leaning on the bedside and reading a long letter. Hearing this, he simply said, "She is not in danger, so there is no need to come to report." After being so lonely for 10 days, one day, Qingyu became interested in going out and said he wanted to visit Shaoxi. Shaoxi County is located in the south of Lichuan, backed by Zitan Mountain, and behind Zitan Mountain is Nanran. The most famous inkstone in the world comes from Shaoxi. Qingyu likes to write 2 strokes of calligraphy on weekdays. It is understandable that she wants to go to Shaoxi to have a look. It took 2 days to go to Shaoxi. It was a long journey, and Shaoxi was next to Nanran. Dragonfly thought that although the princess was not in danger at the moment, she might encounter her if she went there. "It's dangerous. This should be reported to Prince Ji." Ji Shizi was silent for a moment. She was originally here for a trip. She wanted to go out to relax. Let Ji Ren and the 4 of them follow her secretly. During the trip to Shaoxi, Dragonfly rode a horse and Qingyu stayed in the carriage. During the 2 days on the road, the scenery was beautiful, so the curtains of the carriage were always drawn up. Looking in from the car window, Qingyu was lying on the soft cushion with her legs bent, her cheek propped up with one hand, and her eyes slightly closed, which was exactly the same posture of resting her mind as she did at home. This was the first time that Dragonfly looked at Qingyu's posture so closely, but he felt a little strange in his heart. He felt that her expression was not like recuperating, but like she was holding her breath and listening carefully. Her hearing is considered to be excellent, and she also imitates her to close her eyes and listen. But apart from the folk songs of village women working in the distance, and the melodious chirping of birds in the nearby mountains and fields, no other sounds were heard. After arriving in Shaoxi County, Qingyu finally regained the energy he had when he first arrived at Lichuan Palace and went out every day. In the first 2 days, she visited several masters of inkstone making. On the 3rd day, she went to Shaoxi, where inkstones are produced, to experience the scenery of the stream. On the 4th day, she wanted to visit Zitan Mountain. But Dragonfly told her that there was no peace in the mountain, and she didn't force it and just took a nap at the foot of the mountain before returning to the town with Dragonfly. In the next few days, she went shopping on the street. Today she bought a few pearls and a pot of gold bullets. Tomorrow she bought a slingshot and 2 pieces of silk cloth, and the day after that she bought a dagger and some pairs of soft shoes. There was no plan, and they looked like I just buy whatever I want and buy whatever I come across. Then one day she suddenly asked Dragonfly if Mengjin was good at making and detoxifying poisons. Dragonfly said yes. The next day, she saw that she had found a poison book from nowhere and read it day and night, vowing to compete with Mengjin. State. Since there was a medicine shop near the inn where they stayed, the medicine shop became a place where Qingyu often stayed. From time to time, she would be seen getting some medicinal materials from the medicine shop and coming back to tinker with them. Dragonfly didn't suspect anything. She really couldn't think of anywhere else, because in her heart, she completely agreed with Prince Ji and believed that Qingyu was indeed an innocent and ignorant princess. Even though Qingyu had arrived at the foot of Zitan Mountain, she didn't expect that this naive little princess actually came to explore Nanran's ancient tomb. Because according to common sense, it is impossible for this little girl under 16 to know that Nanran's ancient tomb is hidden in Zitan Mountain, and according to common sense, even if she had some chance to learn the location of the tomb, she would not be so reckless. Day went to explore this dangerous ancient tomb alone, which had just killed 16 masters of Prince Ji. Normally, without the blood of the saint, she would not be able to break through the tomb door and enter the tomb. Dragonfly took everything into account and made the biggest mistake in her life. Under her nose, Chengyu slowly gathered all the tools and medicines needed to explore Nanran's ancient tomb. On the night of the second day of August, Chengyu carried a pot of osmanthus flowers and climbed up to the east wall of the inn, lying on the wall while drinking wine and watching the moon. The flower demons most admire the bravery and fearlessness of their flower master, but Chengyu is not a lonely person. The lost Jishitsi suffered in the ancient tomb made her very aware of the dangers in the tomb, so she was very cautious this time and did not hesitate to pick off Shisheng. After a long conversation with the ancient white orchid in Prince Ji's courtyard, she took off the Shisheng flower. That was exactly 1 month ago. So she hasn't had a good night's sleep for a month. The fortune teller said that she would have 3 calamities in her life, the first of which was the calamity of illness. She suffered this calamity when she was 1 year old. Although the imperial master could not figure out what kind of strange disease she had, he figured out that in order to cure her strange disease, her father would have to ask for hundreds of flowers and trees and erect a building to enshrine them. Then it was unclear whether her father found Ju Hibiscus or whether Ju Hibiscus found her father on his own initiative. Then 100 clan leaders were invited into the Shirwa Tower one by one, and that was it. In fact, her parents had always been confused about what kind of disease she had. In their simple understanding, they always thought that she was possessed by evil spirits. She only heard Zhu Jin mention it when she was older. That's not a disease, it's just the awakening of the extraordinary power of being born as a flower master. And that so-called extraordinary power is the ability to hear the voices of all the flowers and trees in the world. The Huamu clan calls it the power of omniscience. Because Chenyu doesn't like gossip, he has no idea what the use of this ability to hear the voices of flowers and trees in the world is. Let her choose on her own. She prefers something more conventional. She doesn't insist on the sword-flying fairy. She just wants the ability to turn stones into large banknotes. It's a pity that she had no choice. God only gave her this power of omniscience that was useless and only brought her suffering. I still remember that she was still a 1-year-old child at that time, young and fragile. When her ability awakened, if there were thousands of voices filling her ears from thousands of miles away, pouring into her mind and disrupting her mind, she could neither avoid nor bear it. Fortunately, Zhu Jin and Yao Huang acted quickly and created a sound of hope for her. When she couldn't bear it and almost died, they managed to save her life. Shisheng is a seal. When she wears it, she can seal the supernatural powers in her body, allowing her to grow safely. Shisheng is also an important tool in cultivation. She must absorb the spiritual power of the flower masters every day so that she can reshape the spirit body of the flower master in her mortal body so that she can one day control the omniscience of the flower master. Zhu Jin said that if she could control this spiritual power, she would take off the Shisheng, and those thousands of voices would flow into her heart again, and she would no longer have troubles and pains, but would be able to roam freely in her heart. There are thousands of words in thousands of flowers and trees. She can hear them in an instant, recognize them in an instant, and understand them in an instant. If she wants to know more, she can still communicate with her in her heart. Conversing with flowers and trees thousands of miles away is like living in a secluded room and being able to hear everything in the world. It can indeed be said to be an omniscient power. Shisheng needs to absorb the spiritual power of hundreds of flowers for 15 years to shape the flower master's spiritual body. This is the reason why Qingyu needs to stay in Ping'an City for 15 years. During these 15 years of imprisonment, it was said that Qingyu couldn't live without Shawalu, but in fact it was that she couldn't live without Shisheng. Shisheng cannot leave Shawalu, so she cannot leave Shawalu. Shisheng was hung by Cheng Yu on the spout of the white porcelain wine flask. She took a sip of osmanthus chin, and Shisheng bumped her upper lip. The ancient white orchid in Jeswang courtyard is indeed knowledgeable and well-informed when it comes to the poison barrier in the ancient tomb. But flowers and trees can also lie, and sometimes they can't remember things clearly. Therefore, the whole picture of Nanrand ancient tomb is restored. She had to listen to a lot of opinions and make a lot of preparations. The night when she first took off Shisheng, she was almost killed by the thousands of voices in her head. It was the flower master's spirit body that Shisheng had built in her body that was used to great effect. Although her ears were ringing, she had a headache, and her eyes were still bloodshot. She finally didn't faint like she did when she was a child. After enduring a miserable few days, I gradually became able to distinguish what those voices were saying. To this day, although she still has a headache after taking off the Shisheng, and at most she can only distinguish the messages conveyed by the flowers and trees within 100 miles radius, she is much better than at the beginning. And for visiting Nanrand ancient tomb, this is enough. She had been tossing herself for a month, and she had basically figured out what was inside Nanrand's ancient tomb. On the way to Tsaoxi, she felt that the biggest problem was how to obtain Mang Jin's blood of the saint so that she could break through the tomb door. Prince Ji really protected Mang Jin very carefully, and she was unable to attack her in the palace for 20 days. She came to Tsaoxi in the name of Lan Yan. She originally wanted to inquire about the flowers and trees nearby to see if there were any other ways to break the tomb. She didn't have high hopes at first, thinking that if it didn't work, she would go back to the palace to discuss it further, but she didn't expect that the problem would be solved quickly. When she was taking a nap at the foot of Zitan Mountain that day, an ancient cypress next to the ancient tomb and a welcoming pine in the mountains told her that New Year's Day is the beginning of January, and it is also the beginning of life. When the time comes, with the ancient tomb as the center, according to the 8 directions of the innate Bagua, the water reflecting the moon is collected from the natural rivers, lakes, and streams in order. And the water from all directions is combined into a bottle, which is called the water spirit key. It can also open the doors of ancient tombs. Yesterday was the first day of the new year. She had completed this important task after stunning the dragonfly last night. At this time, the celadone bottle in her left hand contained the exquisite tomb opening key. She had a lot of things to do in the past few days and had no time to think about the ancient cypress and the welcoming pine in her mind. She had finished everything today and had everything ready. She was just waiting to go to the mountain tomorrow. So she had some free time and planned to find out the origin of this novel method of opening a tomb that they gave her. Among the thousands of noisy voices, the voice of the ancient cypress was distinguished. The flower owner is asking why the water from all directions can also open the door of the ancient tomb. That's because the husband of the god Nalando is in charge of the world. Lord Water, God of the Waters. Qingyu wondered what Nalan Duocean was. Gubai was considerate. The flower owner has never heard of Nalando God, has he? This is not surprising. Mortals in this world have long since changed their beliefs, and not many even among the demon clan still remember those ancient rumors. He explained, in ancient legends, God Nalando was the mother goddess of mortals and the god worshipped by the first mortals in this world. And the first king of mortals was named Abuto, who was called Human Lord Abutuo is the envoy of the god Nalando. This ancient tomb in Zitan Mountain is not so much the tomb of the ancestors of the Nanran people as it is the tomb of the ancestors of the entire human race, because what is hidden in the tomb is human beings. The remains of Lord Abuto. It is true that they are thousands of years old. Chang Yu couldn't keep up and frowned. Speak slower. Gubai adjusted his speaking speed. It is true that in the passage of thousands of years, mortals have long forgotten who is buried in this ancient tomb. They only remember that this is a holy land. Chang Yu could almost resist the pain in his head and kept up with his speed. He snapped his fingers and said, "Don't be so slow." Gubai. Gubai regained his speaking speed because they remembered that this was a holy land. Mortals renovated and renovated the ancient tomb thousands of times, which made the layout and function of the ancient tomb irrelevant in later generations. But even so, the method of opening the tomb cannot be changed by mortals. Either it must be the blood of the Master Budo in the mortal world, or it must be the water of the 8 directions reflecting the moon taken in the new moon. Legend has it that these 2 methods of opening the tomb were all personally decided by the Lord Abudo when he was still alive. Once she caught up with Gu Bai's speaking speed, Cheng Yu's brain reacted very quickly, and she immediately grasped the key point. This Abudo is very interesting. If this tomb is the tomb of Nalando, then it can be understood why the water god the key can also open the tomb door, and the water god is her husband. But Abudo is buried here, and the water god key is needed to open the tomb. Is it possible that Abudo also likes the water god? The dedicated Gu Bai couldn't help but hesitated. Flower Master, did I mention to you just now that the Master Abudo is a man, and the water god is also a man? Cheng Yu said, "Oh, they are both men. I forgot, men should not like another man." Gu Bai, who was well informed, couldn't help but refute her backward concept. "Flower Master, your view is not entirely true. But it is impossible for Abu Tua to like the water god, because Abu Tua likes Nalando god, and I heard that it is true love." Cheng Yu, you know all this gossip? Gu Bai modestly said, "I just overheard it accidentally." Seeing that the topic had gone far away, he coughed and returned to the topic. Although this tomb contains the remains of the Master Budo, it can be regarded as the tomb of the Master, but it is said that this tomb is the Master's tomb. The tomb was built where Nalanduo god emerged. Nalanduo god was a god who was born from the light. After he emerged as a human race, he also transformed into the light from the sky and disappeared into the chaos. The owner, Abudo, was once the envoy of the god Nalando, and he followed the god Nalando for many years. After the god Nalando emerged, Abudo missed her and wrote a book that recorded many words from the life of the god Nalando. The book records that the god Nalando once had a conversation with Abudo about building a tomb for her. The god Nalando once told the master, "If you build a tomb for me, then let everyone who can enter the tomb, everyone worships the water god, so I will become immortal, and my last beam of immortal light will also descend in that tomb." Because the amount of information was too rich, Cheng Yu didn't react for a while, and after a long time to digest it, she concluded, "So, this ancient tomb is not actually the tomb of Abudo alone, or it is not the tomb of Abudo. It is just a burial place. It's just the bones of Abu Tua. The real owner of this tomb is actually Nalando, and this is the tomb built by Abu Tua for Nalando. Hopes that one day, the immortal Nalando will be able to cast her last beam of immortal light in the tomb where his bones are buried, right?" Gu Bai lamented, "The master is so affectionate." Cheng Yu murmured, "If you build a tomb for me, then let everyone who can enter the tomb worship the water god. In this way, I will become immortal, and my last beam of immortal light will also descend there." In a tomb. She was curious. Even if Abudo is deeply in love with Nalando, what Nalando likes is the water god, right? Gu Bai was enigmatic. Who knows? According to the owner's notes, when the god Nalando emerged, her husband, the water god, had not yet been born. Cheng Yu felt like she was making up a triangle drama in her head, and said in confusion, "So the water god and his family have arranged a baby marriage with the god Nalando?" She was surprised. "I heard what you mean. Nalando, he is also a very remarkable ancient god. How could he agree and accept an unborn child as his husband?" Gu Bai Wanwan arrived. "No one can force Nalando god. Nalando god recognized the water goddess because of her ability to predict." The owner's note said that Nalando god once had a dream. After she woke up, she told her master that the water god born tens of thousands of years later would be her husband. Cheng Yu sighed, the evil caused by feudal superstition. Then asked, "Why does Lan Duo tell the master everything?" The angle of her question was a bit novel. Gu Bai didn't know how to answer for a while. After a long while, he said, "Maybe I don't have any other friends." Cheng Yu snorted and asked, "What dream did that god Lan Duo have?" Gu Bai answered all questions. "I don't know what dreams I have. The master has not recorded them." The flower owner doesn't know what it means to become immortal, so the key to this is not to do with the dream Nalan Duoshan had. It should be noted that if the gods were to become immortals, their souls would be destroyed, annihilated, and turned into ashes, with no chance of resurrection. But before she became immortal for the human race, Nalando God had a precognitive dream, saying that she would marry the water god in the future. This is actually true. It is said that she will come back to life even if she becomes an immortal. Therefore, Abudo built this ancient tomb not just to obtain the last beam of immortal light from God Nalando. He wanted to let God Nalando stay in this ancient tomb. Resurrection. Changyu was silent for a moment and concluded again. The ancient tomb of Nanran is still standing there, making things difficult for those who want to enter the tomb. It shows that Nalandio has not been resurrected yet. She suddenly remembered, but has the Lord Water God whom Nalando identified as being born now? Gubai was quiet for a while. It can be seen that the flower owner is not well familiar with the history of our Wamu clan. He said meaningfully, "Don't the flower owner know that the first flower owner of our clan was the water god?" What? Changyu finished her drink and listened to the bedtime story Gubai told her. She climbed down the east wall and put on shisheng again. She was ready to sleep. Usually, even if she only took off the shisheng for half an hour, she would still have to lie in bed for at least an hour and a half before she could fall asleep, and she still couldn't sleep well. This time Gubai's fascinating legend attracted her so much that she picked the peach for a whole hour. She had a premonition that she would not be able to sleep well tonight, so she could only close her eyes in bed for a while, but she did not expect that she would fall asleep very quickly. Before going to bed, she thought of Nalando's words again. "If you build a tomb for me, then let everyone who can enter the tomb worship the water god. In this way, I will become immortal, and my last ray of immortal light will also descend in that tomb." She thought this sentence was very interesting and seemed to be somewhat affectionate, but it was clear that Nalando had never met the water god, yet he could say such solemn and affectionate words, which made people feel a little regretful and maybe a little sad. She thought about what Lando had dreamed at that time and fell asleep as she thought about it. Then she had a dream. Changyu knew that she was dreaming, but in her dream, she never thought about waking up. She was walking along a dark corridor in a daze. She couldn't see anything, but she knew how to get to the end of the corridor. She seemed to have walked for a long time and finally saw a bit of white light. When she came to her senses, she found that she was standing barefoot on a piece of desert. The gravel hurt the soles of her feet, and the feeling was very real. The moon is huge, hanging on the horizon, but the sky is very close, and the silver light covers the entire Gobi Desert. Poplar trees dotted the area, and, even though it was night, the golden trees still seemed to be burning with the sun. The wind came from the trees, touched her face, and blew up the corners of her skirt. It was warm and soft. This is the Gobi in late autumn. Although she has never been to the Gobi, she knows that the late autumn night wind in the Gobi should never be so gentle. Those frontier poets often had good sentences describing this desolate frontier place, and those sentences were always as cold and sharp as blades. In her imagination, everything in the Gobi should be as ferocious and desolate as a solitary animal, but at this moment, the moon, the golden populous Euphratica forest, and the soft breeze chasing the fragrance of the grass and trees in the forest seemed to be more peaceful than the spring day. The city is even more gentle and intoxicating. All this tenderness lingered on the slightly raised hem of her skirt, tickling her bare feet slightly. The moon is gentle and the wind is gentle, as if the entire desert has been tamed by someone. She couldn't help but close her eyes, and when she closed her eyes, she heard her own voice, as if she was murmuring to someone, "Then how are you going to make it up to me?" The voice was very light, soft, and half-hearted. Complaints that are half true or false. She didn't remember speaking like this, and she was sure she didn't speak, but it was her voice. She opened her eyes suddenly, and an exquisite wooden house appeared in front of her. The man's whisper came from the wooden house, responding to the complaint. "Can I give you a poem, please?" the man said. The voice was a little hoarse and slightly cool. It had a nice timbre, but she wasn't familiar with it. What poem? Her own voice actually came from the wooden house. The man chuckled. The bright moon shines on the red jade shadow, and the lotus heart hides the fragrance on the sleeves. Don't fool me. It was still her voice, still very light, very soft, and itchy like a cat scratching, resounding in the wooden house. She couldn't help but push the door open. The wooden door slowly opened, and she finally saw the scene in the room clearly. A dim light, a big bed, heavy white gauze lazily hooked up by the silver hook on the bedside. Because she pushed the door open and the wind came in, the dim light began to sway, and the white gauze bed curtain also danced gently with the breeze and candlelight. The quiet room is dark and charming. But the two people lying on the bed among the white silk satin didn't seem to notice the door that suddenly opened and her standing at the door. Of course, they didn't notice the strangely warm late autumn night wind that suddenly blew into the room. Chang Yu leaned against the door, looking confusedly at the woman lying below. His eyes followed the bright red dress that wrapped her slender body up and stopped at her white neck. Further up is a snow-white face. She could catch a glimpse of that face in the mirror every morning as she dressed. Her own face. It should be very familiar, but it's not that familiar. Because she has never seen herself like that. The dim light is useless, but the moonlight is bright. In the bright moonlight, those big apricot-like eyes were filled with moisture, and the ends of the eyes were red. The thin red was slightly raised and extended to the end of the eyebrows, as if rouge was applied. The moist eyes were lined with a thin red color like rouge, and the eyes seemed to have hooks when looking at people. Her heart skipped a beat. Seeing her lying on the white satin, she gently bit her lower lip. It was obvious that he was only biting his lower lip, but when his teeth were released, both his upper and lower lips turned as bright red as pomegranate flowers. She had seen pomegranate flowers before. When they fell on the ground and were soaked by the rain, they had a pure yet indulgent beauty. Her heart skipped a beat again. When she saw that she was speaking, she raised her right hand and pushed the young man leaning on her lightly. She pursed her lips slightly and said innocently, "Don't fool me." She seemed to be angry, but even if she was, anger also seems fake. Don't fool me. Don't fool me. Every word, every breath carries a tickling hook. Qingyu's face turned red, and he couldn't stand firmly if he wasn't leaning against the door. But the woman lying on the bed seemed to make such a gesture naturally. She heard the young man lying above her say in a low voice, "How could that be?" Then she saw the young man's white fingers touching her ears on the bed, and a pair of pearl earrings suddenly appeared on the pair of small earlobes, and the young man whispered, she said, "Mingwei." The finger paused at the earlobe for a moment and moved down slowly. At this moment, Cheng Yu felt the world spinning. When she regained consciousness again, she found that she was lying under the young man, and she became one with the one on the bed, but her vision was a little blurry. She could finally feel the temperature of the finger, which was so hot that it made her shudder, but she didn't know for a moment whether it was the temperature of the young man's finger or her own temperature. The fingers moved to her neck, accompanied by the young man's whisper, "Ruby shadow." A chill went down on the neck that was heated by the young man's caress. It was the touch of the necklace. The bright moon, the shadow of red jade. The bright moon shines in the red jade shadow. Then the finger slipped to her fingertips and gently pinched her ring finger. The young man's voice sounded again, "Lotus heart." She tilted her head and saw that it was a ring. Her fingers were intertwined with the young man's. They were both equally white. Looking closely, she felt that maybe the young man's fingers were whiter, like white porcelain or jade. Her fingers were originally white, but under his gentle rubbing they turned red uncontrollably, with a thin layer of pink. The young man squeezed her fingers again, then slipped his right hand into her sleeve. His fingers circled around her wrist bones and felt like a bracelet. She had a flash of inspiration and said, "First, the bottom of her sleeve smells good. Lotus heart, fragrance on the sleeves." The lotus heart hides the fragrance under the sleeves. The bright moon shines in the red jade shadow, and the lotus heart hides the fragrance under the sleeves. He said he would give her a poem. But it turns out that the poem is not a poem, but a set of jewelry. The young man chuckled. Our Au is very smart. But his fingers still did not stop, resting on her fiery red dress, along her waistline, her legs, all the way to her ankles, and finally he caressed her exposed ankle bones. He held her ankle, his palms were hot, and he felt a little firm. Her whole body was 10 times hotter than before, and she almost sobbed, but she bit her lip hard and didn't let herself make any sound. She moved her right leg slightly and heard the faint sound of bells and the touch of a string on her ankle. She was dizzy and asked the young man in a hoarse voice, "There are only 4 pieces of jewelry in the poem. What is this anklet called?" The young man's fingers finally left her body. He seemed to be looking down at her. His left hand was resting on her right shoulder. She tilted her head and saw his white sleeves. She could even see clearly that the sleeves were embroidered with Yajing's auspicious grass cloud pattern with silver thread, but when her eyes moved up the sleeves inch by inch and moved to his face, she could not see his face clearly. Appearance. With her eyes wide open, she could only make out his lips and jaw. His skin was fair, like cold jade, and the curve of his lips looked a bit cold. He seemed to smile, and the arc curved up slightly, so he wasn't necessarily cold anymore. She could only see a little bit of that face, but she could also imagine that when that face was fully revealed, it must be very handsome. Then she saw him leaning down, and then she felt him pressing against her ear. His breath was hot, and his hoarse voice rubbed against the base of her ear and poured into her ear. "This is Wu Shenglian," the young man said. Chang Yu suddenly woke up. The next day is the 3rd day of August. Dragonfly felt that Chang Yu got up very early today. The princess has never gotten up at midnight since she broke up with the crown prince and no longer had to go to the south study room. But today, the morning star is still hanging in the east sky, and the Zitan mountain in the distance is just a silhouette in the hazy morning light. Chang Yu is actually sitting in the yard drinking tea. Dragonfly asked her, "Princess, did you sleep well last night?" Chang Yu was thinking about something, and there was a little confusion in his eyes, as if there was a heavy fog in his wet eyes. Hearing what Dragonfly said, she frowned and said in a vague voice, "I had a dream last night." Dragonfly was curious. What dream? She was more vague. "It's not a good dream." She pursed her lips and said with some annoyance, "Okay, let's not talk about this anymore. I'll wait for a while, and we'll go to the hall to have some porridge later." Dragonfly didn't ask any more questions. Chang Yu stayed in the courtyard for a while longer. She suddenly woke up from her dream last night and sat on the bed for a long time. Her hands air shaking violently and her heart was beating violently. She sat there from midnight to dawn, but she never recovered. She thought it would be better to let the wind blow, so she moved to the courtyard. After being blown by the morning wind for half an hour, my hands stopped shaking and my heartbeat was not so anxious, but my face was still very hot. She found this uncomfortable and decided that the dream that had caused it was not a good one. She remembered every detail of the dream, and her breathing became disordered at the slightest thought. Neither Zhu Jin nor Li Xiang taught her this. No one told her that there was such a thing or such a dream in the world. If her best friend Hua Feiwu is here, he can interpret this dream for her. She would tell Chang Yu that such a dream is called a dream. Girls may have such dreams when they get older. In fact, it is nothing. But because Hua Feiwu was not with her, Chang Yu didn't know that this was actually nothing. However, hair drying still works. Chang Yu finally returned to normal before the sun scorched the morning breeze. She made a cup of tea for Dragonfly, using the hibiscus petal she had hidden close to her body. For a well-informed shadow guard like Dragonfly, even the best drug in the world may not be able to cure her. The problem is that although the petal taken from Zhu Jinyuan's body hidden by Chang Yu is used to induce enchantment, it is obviously not an enchantment drug. Although it is said that a good shadow guard will never fall into the same pit twice, but because what Chang Yu did to her has completely entered the category of strange power and chaos, Dragonfly fell into the pit again without any suspense, a cup of tea, and fell into a deep sleep. Chang Yu looked at the sky, filled a bulging treasure bag with the things he had bought a while ago, turned over and climbed onto the dragonfly's forehead. Dragonfly is a very fast horse, but there is only one problem: it is strong. But Qingyu was a good rider and trainer, so he didn't put much thought into dealing with it. What made her put a lot of thought into was the 4 secret guards who were always behind her to protect her. When she first left Hanqing, Dragonfly mentioned that Ji Mingfeng had left a few people beside her, and she paid attention to them. She didn't know how to use martial arts, so she would definitely not be able to defeat these secret guards, but Zitin Mountain was a good place to set up a formation due to its deep forests and deep trees. She doesn't know how to deal with those who come to Wu, but it's much easier to handle those who come to Wen and Xian. When she was little, she thought she was a fairy because she learned things very quickly. It is not a big deal for her to master mysterious formation in 10 days. So today, she really trapped the 4 secret guards at the foot of Zitin Mountain. It seemed that everything happened according to her plan, but she also understood that she only had this chance to visit the grave. If she failed, there would be no second chance. Ji Mingfeng would not let her have a second chance. Her success this time was partly due to her proper preparation, and the other half was actually due to Prince Ji taking her lightly. Success or failure only happens today, right now, once. At 3 o'clock in the morning, when the sun is feeding, the ancient tomb of Nanran is in front of you. The ancient trees are towering, standing side by side, and the huge canopies are stacked on top of each other. They seem to cover the mountainside with an undulating green carpet, so that the sunlight can only peek in sporadically, making the cemetery dark for miles around for no reason. However, the ancient tomb built against the mountain is not as hidden as Chengyu imagined. In front of the tomb door, there are 2 ferocious tomb-suppressing beasts. It seems that they are not afraid of letting the world know that this is where the ancestors of the Naran tribe are buried. Bone Place. When Chengyu filled the water spirit key into the groove of the tomb door, Gu Bai, who was guarding the tomb, recognized her. At this moment, thousands of words could only be turned into a deep reminder, since the Naran tribe 200 years ago, after the famous craftsman went in to repair the ancient tomb, a palace change occurred in Nanran, and the secrets about the ancient tomb's mechanism were also left behind in that palace change. Over the past 200 years, it was these mortals who opened the door. In the ancient tomb, no one can actually enter the last level of the tomb. The secrets we tell you about this ancient tomb are all secrets from 200 years ago and are not complete. Flower Master, you must be careful and act according to circumstances. Come back alive. The words "come back alive" passed by Chengyu's ears. She shook her right hand slightly and poured the last drop of water from the celadone bottle into the stone groove, and the tomb door suddenly opened. She took back the porcelain bottle with a calm expression and put it into the treasure bag on her shoulder. She knew very well that after stepping into this door, she would either live or die, but she never hesitated, never paused, and never looked back. Only a little light shines through the door of the tomb, like a bloody mouth, ready to chew up all intruders and swallow them into the tomb. How can one survive in this ancient tomb? Torches cannot be used, as the slightest amount of heat will evaporate the toxins stained on the tomb walls, so luminous pearls are needed. Be gentle and don't wake up the poisonous insects sleeping deep in the tomb. Pay attention to every detail around you, because no one knows what new features the craftsman added to this place after entering the tomb 200 years ago. Then walk forward along the main tomb passage. 1/3 of the way there, you will encounter a pool of water that turns bones into bones. There is a wooden rope bridge on top of it. You need to be very careful when crossing the bridge. After the rope bridge, you can see huge stones standing on both sides of the tomb passage, with painted reliefs on the stones. Do not touch it or approach it with a torch, because every color on the stone is a highly toxic substance that is highly volatile and invades through the texture. If the poison enters the body, the medicine stone will not cure it. In this section of the tomb passage, even if the pearl is used as the light source, it is not allowed to get close to look closely at the reliefs on the stone, because although the paintings are good, they will fascinate the soul, capture the soul, and captivate the mind. If you can safely walk through this dangerous boulder corridor, you will encounter 5 passages lined up in a row. You need to choose the hole in the middle. Qingyu didn't know what she would encounter if she chose the other 4 holes, and the flowers and trees didn't tell her. In the memories of the flowers and trees, everyone who walked out of this ancient tomb alive, without exception, chose the hole in the middle. After passing through the hole, there should be a patio. Qingyu looked at the high wall in front of him. According to the flowers and trees, there should have been a patio in front of her at this time. And the huge patio that the flowers and trees mentioned should be the most dangerous place in the entire ancient tomb. The entire patio is a bone-changing pool, and 72 bronze figurines made of tumblers stand opposite the bone-changing pool, shaking. If the correct bronze figurine is used, there will be a path rising from the bottom of the pool to help people cross the patio. If the wrong bronze figurine is shaken, what will rise up will be the water in the pool that turns into bones. Which tumblers to shake are like a code that keeps changing. Every day is different. But Qingyu had memorized this, and she also prepared a slingshot and gold bullets to shoot at the bronze figurines. Originally, she thought that this level should not be so difficult to pass, but now a high wall was erected in front of her, isolating her from the last dangerous level protecting the tomb. If she couldn't get through this high wall, even if she had reached this point today, she would have walked further than all the people who entered the tomb in the past 200 years, but it would still be a useless effort. Of course, she can't do useless work. This is probably the new machine that the craftsman added 200 years ago. I didn't expect it to be a big one. Qingyu raised the pearl in his hand high, pursed his lips, and looked at the high wall in front of this is a stone wall, but there is no trace of splicing on the wall. It seems that it was originally a square boulder standing in front of the patio and behind the hole. But there is no such huge stone anywhere in the world. The wall is divided into 3 areas from left to right. Based on the standard of 18 horizontal grids, many grids are drawn along the way. They are so densely packed that it is unclear what their purpose is. Nothing else is special. The Nanran people are fond of using poison, so she didn't dare to test the stone wall with her bare hands. She took out her dagger and knocked on the corner a few times and heard a few empty sounds. This stone wall is not solid. And whether it was an illusion or not, after her random knocks, the stone wall seemed to tilt a little towards her side. Qingyu was startled and stopped. She couldn't help but take a step back. At this moment, the stone wall visibly pressed down on a large section, telling her that she had taken the wrong path and moved the wrong step. When she lowered her head, she found that there was also a grid under her feet. Lotus. Qingyu suddenly had a bright idea in her mind. When it came to grid, she had actually always been following grid. The tomb was huge, and the main tomb passage was also extremely wide. When she first stepped onto the tomb passage, she noticed that there were 18 grids drawn across the tomb passage. The tomb passage extended toward the inside of the tomb, and those grids continued 18 by 8, like one chessboard connected to another chessboard, extending all the way to the high wall. At first she thought they were decorations in the tomb, but she paid it no mind. Now look at the 3 checkerboards on the stone wall. The third is the shortest, the second is the longest, the first is 1/2 of the second. The first paragraph should refer to the tomb gate to the bone pool is 1/3 of the tomb passage. The second section should refer to the bone pool to the cave, which is 2/3 of the tomb passage. The third section should refer to the passage from the cave to the high wall. She remembered that she had walked a total of 120 steps. She stared at the third checkerboard on the wall for a moment, counting down each square, 18 horizontal squares and 121 vertical squares. She stood there for a while, her hands shaking. Gubai said that the person who built this mechanism was a well-known craftsman, so he must be a genius among craftsmen. Those who are qualified to serve in this tomb should be geniuses. The tricks that geniuses like to play are not necessarily complex and sophisticated, but they must be full of ingenuity. A thin layer of sweat broke out on Qingyu's forehead. She took out a bundle of thick ropes just in case from her luggage, tied a loop, and hung it on a lotus relief on the top of the tomb. She tugged on the rope and it was steady. He climbed up along the rope, pulled out the dagger, and looked at the first row of the first checkerboard on the stone wall. For a long time, she held her breath and gently tapped the 12th square from right to left in the first row with the end of the dagger. That was the first square she stepped into when entering the tomb. There was a thud, and her whole body trembled, and there was also a thunk in the stone wall, as if in response to the strike of a dagger. But the wall didn't slope down suddenly like she had just done when she made the wrong move on the ground. The stone wall remained motionless. She became calmer. Holding the dagger is like holding a drumstick, knocking it all the way on the alien chessboard. Boom, 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 boom. Every blow was the grid she had stepped on and the path she had taken since entering the tomb. She has an excellent memory. On the 212th step of the first paragraph, she crossed 2 squares in 1 step. On the 113th step of the second paragraph, she stepped between the 13th and 14th squares. She remembered all the solid lines between them. Because Gubai told her to be careful, she always paid attention to useless things. And she seldom failed to remember the things she had noticed. After tapping the last square, a rumble came from the ground, like the roar of a trapped animal, and the entire stone wall suddenly sank into the bottom of the tomb. Before she could react, she fell to the ground. His right arm hurt from the fall, and the breath he had been holding since he climbed up the stone wall finally relaxed. She gasped for air. Guessed it. This high wall is actually connected to the entire main tomb passage, and the method of moving the wall is actually the path that the tomb trespassers took to get here. This is indeed an indescribable ingenuity. Only then did Cheng Yu feel scared. If she guessed correctly, luckily she broke into the tomb alone today, so she had a chance to live. Judging from what she had experienced just now, the main tomb passage should only record one person's steps at a time and transmit them to the stone wall. Then the tomb intruder needs to memorize the chess square he stepped on when he came, and then it will be reproduced on the wall. Above, you can pass the level. If another person follows her in, the stone wall mechanism may have been triggered. As soon as the two of them step on the last square and reach the high wall, the stone wall will press down and smash them into pieces. Even if she came here alone, if she couldn't figure out the secret on the wall and had to go back the way she came and step on the grid again, the stone wall would definitely collapse and crush her to pieces. A moment ago, when she was moving, she accidentally stepped on the last row of grids on the ground. The stone wall suddenly tilted, which was a warning to her. This is indeed life or death again. Fortunately, today's luck was with her, and she solved the mystery. But no one knows whether the craftsman 200 years ago left other machines in this tomb. She already knew the skill of this craftsman very well, so she did not dare to relax at all. Even after passing this level, she still kept her spirits high. After closing her eyes and resting for a long time, she dared to open them and discern what was waiting for her in the next level. In the dim light of the night pearl and the rising and falling white mist, one can see a gloomy courtyard, a pool of bones filled with white smoke, and 72 strangely shaped bronze figurines at the end of the ominous pool. There is a stone tablet standing next to the bone transformation pond, with 3 characters Yushu Hai written in one stroke on it. Cheng Yu breathed a sigh of relief. This is the last dangerous barrier that the flowers and trees say protects the tomb, and it is a barrier that she is familiar with. She calmly took out the slingshot and golden pill from her bag and aimed at the smiling horse, riding sun-shooting figurine in the center. On the 3rd day of the Lunar New Year, the crescent moon shines deeply on the Yushu Sea. When riding a horse and shooting the sun, the golden road begins to unfold. Kanemaru flew out. Cheng Yu entered the tomb at the 3rd moment of Shinshur, and successfully entered the main tomb chamber of Nanran ancient tomb at the 1st moment of Yushur. It is said that the books contained in the ancient tomb of Nanran collected thousands of years of wisdom from the Naran people. When Cheng Yu stood outside the tomb, he thought that even if the room was not packed with people, if there was a coffin in there, there would probably be a coffin full of books. Always hidden. However, when I stepped into the tomb, I realized that there was indeed a coffin, but the coffin contained not a book but an ancient corpse. Latest chapter of Tangqi free novels, Free full-text reading. Tangqi's works, complete novels, Qimao Free Nov. The sarcophagus has no lid. The moment Qingyu saw the ancient corpse, he remembered that it was an ancient tomb. An ancient tomb was not originally used to store books, but to hide corpses. She was actually a little afraid of ancient corpses and skeletons, but because everything she experienced tonight was too dangerous, her whole body was numb at this time, and she couldn't feel any fear when looking at the ancient corpse lying in the sarcophagus. Without fear, he leaned down and took a closer look. Under the dim light of the pearl, it can be seen that the ancient corpse is dressed in golden armor, with its head covered by a golden mask. In the darkness of countless years, although the brilliance of gold has dimmed, it cannot hide its nobility and magnificence. She moved the pearl closer and saw clearly what the golden mask looked like. She stared at the mask for a long time. From the high bridge of the nose and the thin lips, she could see a sense of familiarity that surprised her. The face with eyes closed and sleeping on this golden mask actually looked 70 to 80% like the Prince of Lichuan. The Prince Ji in the middle. She was stunned and noticed the posture of the ancient corpse lying in the coffin. For such a powerful and exposed warrior in armor, his posture while lying in the coffin is extremely restrained and quiet. His hands are placed on his chest, and the golden fingertips cover the phalanges that may have become dazzling. A samurai is supposed to hold a sword and hold a sword, which is to place an open weapon in the coffin. For a samurai, a jade sword used as a ritual weapon should also be placed in his hand. But in the folded hands of the golden warrior, he tenderly held a strange-colored red lotus. Qingyu got closer and took a closer look. The lotus was carved from red jade, and under the dim light of the night pearl, it glowed with splendor and halo. The lifelike red lotus, if you don't look closely, you will just think that it has just been picked from the lotus pond covered with morning dew, received the first ray of sunlight in the morning, and held by a handsome warrior with tenderness and cherishment. In hand, this golden warrior who looks like Ji Mingfeng, the red lotus in the warrior's hand, this ancient coffin that no one has been near for hundreds of years, this ancient tomb. Changyu searched for a moment in the tomb, but found no record of the person in the coffin. She did think of the legend that Gubai had mentioned to her. In that mysterious alien legend, it is said that at the beginning of the world, the first mortal king in this world was called Abudo, the Lord of Man, Abudo, and the Nanrand ancient tomb is where Abudo's bones are buried. But if we want to talk about the beginning of the mortal world, it is too far away after all. How can the remains of that time be preserved to this day? Therefore, this thought only flashed in her mind, and then disappeared without a trace like a floating cloud. She wondered whether Prince Ji's ancestors were also married to Nan Ran, and the person in the coffin might be one of Prince Ji's ancestors. Therefore, he soon stopped worrying and concentrated on looking for the ancient books hidden in the tomb of the Naran people. In fact, there is not a room full of books, not a coffin of books, not even a box or a shelf of books. Changyu searched the entire tomb and found only 5 books. An extremely old book, with ink on paper and bound with threads, in 5 thin volumes. But the ink on it has not faded for hundreds of years, the paper used has not rotted for hundreds of years, and the threads that bind the books have not been broken for hundreds of years. This is really surprising, so even if he only found these 5 books, Changyu was still interested. He flipped them over and over for a while. He noticed that there was nothing on the cover, not even a title, so he planned to flip through it. Look through each volume to see what's in it. I never thought about flipping through the pages and got lost in it. About 3 quarters ago, with the dim light of the night pearl, Changyu finished reading all 5 books and realized that she had stayed too long and it was time to leave the tomb. These 5 books include 1 on mountain geography, 1 on historical records and legends, 1 on Qi Men Dun Jia, 1 on Poison Codex, and 1 on Gu Book. She liked the first 2 volumes very much, but she didn't understand the last 3 volumes very well, but she also found them interesting. In the rest of her life, Changyu asked herself again and again why she had forgotten the time. If she could have left the tomb even a moment earlier, maybe Dragonfly would not have died. But all of this cannot be repeated. That night, at the end of the night, she left the tomb with 5 ancient books and returned the same way. Then, when she was 2/3 of the way to the huge stone corridor, she saw the light of fire in front of her. Then came the nightmare that tortured her again and again in countless deepest nights. She stayed in the tomb too late. Dragonfly, who struggled to wake up from his deep sleep, finally guessed where she was and came to the ancient tomb to look for her. Like every tomb explorer who doesn't know the secret of the ancient tomb, the dragonfly lit a torch to illuminate it. The high temperature of the torch and the scent of rosin awakened the poisonous insects sleeping at the bottom of the tomb and also awakened the poisons everywhere in the tomb. Fortunately, the dragonfly did not go deep into the tomb, and Chengyu made many antidotes beforehand, which could temporarily relieve the poison on the 2 of them. They ran all the way and were about to cross the bone-breaking pool near the tomb door to isolate the poisonous insects in the tomb and find a way out, but the only rope bridge over the pool was cut off by someone unknown. In order to send her safely to the other side of the bone transformation pond, Dragonfly died in the bone transformation pond. Run! The last time she heard Dragonfly's voice was her mute and urgent voice behind her. Princess, the last time she saw the dragonfly was the sudden splash of white water in the bone pool in the dim light coming from the cave entrance. The year Dragonfly died, he was less than 28 years old. Whether she was awake or in a dream, Changyu couldn't remember how she walked from the one pool to the outside of the ancient tomb that night. There was a gap in her memory. The memory of the ancient tomb can only stay at that extremely cold and desperate moment. She called the dragonfly's name with a trembling voice and leaned towards the scorching water. She never dared to recall that moment when she was awake, so she could never figure out what she wanted to do when she was pushed to the other side by the dragonfly and crawled back crying. Maybe she was trying to catch the dragonfly. When she got close to the pool water, her hands were immediately blistered by the steam, which showed that the dragonfly submerged in the pool water had indeed no bones left. She shouldn't be so stupid and try to catch her, but she can't catch her at all. She was never stupid. But maybe she had no choice at that moment. She just wanted to catch her, whether alive or dead. She wanted to catch her. Then there was a blank space like a lost soul. But the void didn't last long. The next memory about outside the tomb appeared with the moonlight. At that time, there was a crescent moon in the sky, and the moon was at the zenith. It's still midnight. Outside the ancient tomb, there were 2 columns of iron cavalry lined up. The royal guards in black were lined up on their horses like silent stone sculptures, only the torches in their hands were burning brightly. The dark yellow color is like the light of the morning sun, reflecting the tomb door, the tomb-suppressing beast, and the gloomy forest in front of the tomb door like daylight. Ji Mingfeng rode a maroon horse and stood behind the black-clothed guards. Changyu couldn't see his face clearly, but could feel his eyes falling on her face with coldness. After a moment, he slowly spoke. "What on earth are you doing here?" She had met Ji Mingfeng on the street 3 days ago. At that time, he was taking Mengjin to a restaurant and did not see her. She thought that they must be here to visit the tomb for the second time, so after getting the water spirit key on the first night of the Lunar New Year, she only rested for 1 day before coming to Zitan Mountain to visit the tomb. She wanted to get ahead of them. Just last night, she had thought that if she could get out of the tomb alive with the ancient books, she would probably choose a quiet night to give those books to Ji Mingfeng, thus completing his life, saving grace. She met Ji Mingfeng on the night of the full moon on February 15th. It is very appropriate to form a relationship on one bright moon night and completely break it on another bright moon night. It seems to have a sense of fate and helplessness. Died. But the script of fate was beyond her control. She came out of the ancient tomb alive and brought out the ancient books alive, but she didn't give up. She tried to speak and found her voice. Hidden in the huge shadow of the tomb beast, she asked Ji Mingfeng a few steps away in a hoarse voice, "Where is the dragonfly?" The sound of horse hoofbeats sounded, and Ji Mingfeng took 2 steps closer. His face became clear in the firelight. With a very cold face, she heard his cold voice, "She died because of you." He seemed a little confused when you asked Dragonfly to take you to visit Yushan to explore. The secrets of Yushan. I asked her to warn you not to get into trouble. Is it true that you will not regret it even if you make 100 mistakes? Is it? The words were like sharp swords, causing her to take a deep breath. Yes, the dragonfly is dead. The pain she felt when the dragonfly fell into the water in the ancient tomb once again hit her body, but this time she didn't make a sound. She couldn't make a sound, so she could only use her right hand, which was full of blood blisters, to tightly hold the skirt of her chest. Due to too much force, the blood blisters were squeezed and burst, staining the white fabric into a mess, but she didn't feel any pain. She panted for a while, but there was an instinctive restraint in her panting, so no one noticed. When she was finally able to make a sound, Ji Mingfeng's eyes fell on her again. She seemed to ask herself or anyone, "Is this true?" Her voice was still hoarse, as if it had been sanded with sandpaper. After asking, she thought that Ji Mingfeng was right, the dragonfly died because of her. So she gently responded to herself, "Yes, that's the case, it's my fault." No one answered her. The firelight was a little far away from her, but the moonlight was very close to her, but they only made her feel cold when they fell on her body. After a while, Ji Mingfeng finally spoke again, and his voice was no longer as cold as before. He said calmly, "Dragonfly." He closed his eyes. "She died for you. It was her duty. But she must die. It has some effect." He looked at her from a distance with a look in his eyes. He asked her, "Princess, from now on, can you be more calm and stop being so reckless? Since you can't protect yourself, can you stop making your own decisions, always putting yourself in danger?" She reacted for a long time and said with some difficulty, "You want to say that since I am useless, I shouldn't always cause trouble for others, right?" Dragonfly. Just saying the name made her choke. But she endured it, suppressing the huge pain in her throat, and said hoarsely, "Dragonfly's death should not be so light. She should not just pay for the naughty and ignorant princess." Her lips trembled. This trip was not completely useless. She and I, together we retrieved the Nair and ancient book you wanted. As she spoke, she opened the treasure bag she carried with her with trembling fingers that were no longer very flexible. When she was about to take out the 5 ancient books, a female voice interrupted in a panic. No. It was Mengjin who had been writing beside Ji Mingfeng. With that cold and sharp "no," Chengyu watched helplessly as the 5 ancient books turned into paper dust in an instant. When the night wind blew, the paper dust scattered into the endless night, like fireworks left behind after burning. A picture of useless soot. Her eyes stayed on the traces of paper dust, feeling a little dazed. In the huge silence, Mengjin was suddenly heard gnashing her teeth and accusing, "Since the princess can take out our clan's holy books from the tomb with many traps, how come she doesn't know that these holy books should only be left in the tomb to be copied? How could she do that? Don't you know that every one of them is filled with secret techniques that will turn them into dust when exposed to the wind?" The horse under her crutch took 5 or 6 steps straight forward, and her face turned livid. The princess's visit to the tomb was really good. She cut off our road forcibly. "In my opinion, Dragonfly's death is lighter than a feather, simply." Qingyu's face turned pale. Ji Mingfeng suddenly spoke and asked her, "What on earth are you doing here?" This was the question he asked her at the beginning. She didn't answer just now, but now he didn't seem to need her answer, and continued to ask her as if in disbelief, "What exactly do you want to do?" She couldn't say a word. His questions came one after another. "Why didn't you tell me when you came to get Nan Rant's ancient books? Do you know how important these books are? With them, how many innocent sacrifices can be reduced on the battlefield?" She tried to speak, but only said the word "I." But he closed his eyes and refused to listen to any of her arguments, even if it was a confession. He seemed extremely tired, and as if he finally couldn't suppress his anger towards her, his voice was extremely low. "Princess Hongyu, you are so bold and wanton, and you make mistakes 100 times without knowing how to repent. Today the dragonfly died because of you, and in the future more men from Lichuan will die because of your willfulness. You can bear so many lives. Can you afford it?" He also speculated coldly, "Maybe because you are the princess, You think that they are born with low lives, but you don't actually care about so many lives? This is no longer the pain of a sharp sword. She sat there, feeling confused that she had also fallen into the bone pool with the dragonfly tonight, but was picked up. She was not dead, but her bones and flesh had been separated. She was still alive, but she had to endure this kind of bone and flesh. The pain of flesh separation is more uncomfortable than death. Maybe it was just because she was still sitting in front of the tomb door. She didn't cry. She looked strong and cold, so they thought she was strong and cold enough. No one knew that she was always in pain, so no one cared about her pain. Ji Mingfeng seemed to never want to look at her again. After those words that almost made her irrecoverable, she turned around and drove away. Meng Zhen and his guards followed behind. She thought that she had ruined Ji Mingfeng's affairs, and he should indeed be so angry. She didn't blame him, she just felt hurt. Soon the ancient tomb returned to silence and gloom. The moonlight was cold, the wind was cold, and she could hear 1 or 2 night birds chirping, and the chirping was sad. She finally couldn't hold on anymore and collapsed in the shadow cast by the tomb beast. She hugged herself tightly in the shadow and huddled into a small ball. For a whole month, no one knew what kind of pain and torture she had gone through. Just as Gu Bailon said that day, even she would have to spend endless efforts to obtain Nanran's ancient book. No one knows how she spent sleepless nights after taking off the Shishang. No one knows how those noisy sounds made her life worse than death every day and night. No one knows the moon that fetched the key to the water god. The hardships she experienced during the night, no one knew about tonight. Tonight, in those moments where her life was hanging by a thread, she was actually afraid. Then Dragonfly's death, the ancient books that suddenly turned to dust, and Ji Mingfeng's sharp words, none of which she could bear. She was dying of pain. She urgently needed someone to give her some tenderness so that she wouldn't be in so much pain, but since she came to Lichuan, only Dragonfly had given her pure tenderness. But thinking about the dragonfly now only made her feel more painful. What kind of tenderness has she received recently? In the cold and painful river of memories, only the dream last night seemed to be warm, floating up like a warm pearl, touching her fingers and giving her a little heat. In that dream, there was a gentle desert, the moonlight was warm, and the wind was also warm. At that time, there was someone beside her who said softly to her, "Can I give you a poem, please?" That was a person who treated her well, even if he was just a dreamer. Because of this little bit of warmth, she finally had the strength to cry out, and her cry echoed in the gloomy forest, like a little animal that had lost its loved ones. And because no one held her hand to comfort her when she collapsed under the weight of self-blame, and told her that she was not that wrong, and that Dragonfly's death was just an accident that no one wanted to happen. Therefore, one of these memories, the little bit of warmth, gave her strength and courage, but instead made her accept the rhetoric in her heart that made her irrecoverable. It was her willfulness that killed Dragonfly, and her ignorance made Dragonfly's death worthless. This was an irreparable mistake, and she would have to bear the blame for it for the rest of her life. The end of the story is still a bit vague to Yu Qingyu. In the second half of that night, it seemed that people from the palace took her back. After 2 days of hard work, she returned to the palace of Lichuan Palace, and then she was locked up. She fell ill and lived in a trance all day long, so she didn't know exactly how many days she had been detained. She had no memory of seeing Ji Mingfeng again, but one day she heard from the girl who was taking care of her that a happy event was going to be held in the palace, and that Miss Qin was going to marry in and become the mistress. She was in a daze for a while before she realized who Miss Qin was. She thought she was going to marry Ji Mingfeng, and then she felt sleepy again. She always felt sleepy in those days and didn't get enough sleep. It seemed like the next day, Zhu Jin and Li Xiang came to pick her up. They came quietly. When she saw Zhu Hibiscus, her mind became clear and she was no longer so confused. The young man hugged her in shock and said with regret, "If I had known that you would suffer like this, I would never have left you here alone." Therefore, Zhu Hibiscus has always been a sharp-tongued person who dislikes her the most, but in fact, I cherish her the most. But she was so exhausted that she only had time to tell Zhu Jin and ask him to search her memory for the 5 ancient books of Nan Ran and copy them down for the Prince of Lichuan. She got into trouble and had to make up for it. Then he fainted. When she woke up, she was already at Weining Villa. Weining Villa is a royal villa. Although it is also in Lichuan, it is far away from Hancheng. Zhu Jin didn't discuss it with her, so he sealed away the guilt she felt towards Dragonfly that she couldn't bear when she was awake. All the emotions that caused her unbearable pain, as well as the scene of her death as a dragonfly that tormented her deeply in every night's dream, were all sealed deep in her heart by Zhu Hibiscus. Therefore, everything in Lichuan, both good and bad, left only an emotionless and general afterimage to her under the sealing technique of Zhu Hibiscus. The Chengyu who returned to Pingan City half a year later was the Chengyu who had never taken a step out of Pingan City before the age of 15, the Chengyu who had never grown up. Weeping willows beside Bayou River. The night was already very deep, and the sound of pipa on Jin Sanying's bamboo tower had long since stopped. The joyful atmosphere of the flower street that had been taken away by the sound of pipa also said goodbye to Zai happily, sinking into one charming scene after another. In a happy dream. As a result, the entire Bayou River has cooled down, leaving only the gurgling water and the gentle night breeze. He bent his knees and sat on the grass 3 times, resting his chin on one hand and frowning slightly. Chengyu was a little confused. This was the first time that she recalled this past event so completely. Although the past events she told Lian Song were not complete, they were roughly the same. Those secrets that cannot be revealed should never be revealed to anyone at any time. She once swore an oath in Shihua Tower, so it is about the flower owner, Xixing, those ancient legends, and the exchanges with flowers and trees, including the ancient corpse in the tomb. It all went by without a hitch. And, because of some girlish thoughts, it related to some private matters, such as the dream in the desert, but she didn't mention a word. But Lian San was so smart, she didn't know if all the embellishments she had used in the story had deceived him. She didn't know if talking about this past with him in such a half-covered way was being honest with herself. So when she looked at his slightly frowning brow, her heart beat violently. She thought sadly that she was unwilling to lie to him, but she had to. But that was not what His Highness was thinking. What he was thinking about when he frowned was the girl with reddish eyes sitting in front of him that helpless night in front of the gloomy ancient tomb. How she shrank herself into a small ball. Is it like what he saw in the 4 seasons in her heart, squatting alone on the snowy street, hugging herself tightly, hoping to give herself some warmth? That made his heart sink. The Qingyu whose seal is lifted at this time is the real Qingyu, the one whose wings were broken just after he grew up. What was weighing on her body was the regret that her young shoulders could not bear alone, but she didn't know what to do. Like a butterfly that broke its wings just after emerging from its cocoon, she was cruelly frozen in the painful process of transformation. She could not re-enter the cocoon and become a carefree pupa, but she could not spread her wings and become a free butterfly. She stood there painfully still. In the somewhat alarming silence, Chengyu was the first to speak. She asked Lian Song, "I am a bad person, right?" The young man's fingers touched her shoulders. Under the moonlight, those fingers glowed with a lustrous light, more transparent and smooth than the best mutton fat jade. He whispered back to her, "No, they're talking nonsense." "But," she murmured. Lian Song's finger pointed at her shoulder. "Seal these emotions and memories into your body again, and you can be carefree again." Chengyu looked up at him in confusion, but suddenly felt him approaching and holding her. She held her hand and heard him whisper, "But Ayu, I still want you to continue to grow up." Chengyu felt the voice brush against her ears, and it was slightly low, pouring into her ears. It was a bit familiar, but she couldn't grasp where it was familiar at the moment. It was a moment of dizziness. End of Lotus Step Chapter 15, Book 1. By Tangqi. English translated using Google.